I love comparing traditional modern day minimalism to the 70's. To me, people in the 70's were accidental minimalists. Economic situations were different back then, standards were different back then. And before I go any further, I will say that the way things were in the part of the country in which I lived in might have been totally different from the part of the country in which you lived in. So you might not be able to totally relate to everything that I will say. That being said, to me, traditional modern day minimalists are similar to people in the 70's. The obvious way is the fact that modern minimalists don't have a lot of stuff. People in the 70's didn't have a lot of stuff. But there are also 14 ways in which these two groups of people are different. In items 1 to 7, I'm more like the 70's person. And in items 8 to 14, I'm more like the traditional modern day minimalist. Here are the first 7 ways in which the traditional modern day minimalist is different from people in the 70's. Number 1. Nowadays, decluttering seems to be a lifestyle or a routine, never ending. But back then, minimal possessions was a routine, no need to declutter. Number 2. Nowadays, there is a one in, one out rule that some, but not all, minimalists have. But back then, there was no such thing. They just had what they needed and didn't have what they didn't need. Number 3. Nowadays, there is a 100-item rule, or whatever the magic number is, for some, but not all minimalists. But back then, nobody counted their items. Number 4. Nowadays, some minimalists have a tiny wardrobe. But back then, they didn't limit themselves to 3 outfits. But they did have a lot less clothes than the average person does today. Number 5. Some minimalists today limit themselves to black, white, and gray, or to one neutral and one hue. But back then, they had all colors, any color. Number 6. Some, but not all, minimalists today have junk drawers. Back then, I didn't know of anybody who did. Number 7. Nowadays, some minimalists are not allowed to have 2 of something. If they realize they have 2 can openers, they feel they have to donate one. But back then, if somebody had 2 can openers, they kept both of them in case one broke. Those are the first 7 ways in which a traditional modern day minimalist is different from a 70's person. Like I said, in those 7 ways, I am more like the 70's person. Now here are the last 7 ways these two groups of people are different. In these last 7 items, I am more like the traditional modern day minimalist. Number 8. Nowadays, most minimalists have bare walls. And I agree with them. I can't stand anything on the walls except the kids' pics. But back then, a lot of people had clutter on the walls, whether it be deer heads, or whether it be pictures of ships, or flowers, or trees, or roads, or houses, or whatever it may have been. Number 9. A lot of minimalists today do not shop as a hobby. No going to garage sales, or flea markets, or malls. But back then, some of them did shop as a hobby, but they bought either nothing or very little enough that they were still accidental minimalists, or they bought necessities that they would have had to have bought anyway. Number 10, this might be more environmentalist than minimalist, but I do not like fake flowers or plants. But back then I did see a little bit of that. Not much. But then again, I didn't see much of anything back then because I didn't have a lot. Number 11, a lot of minimalists today would not be happy with just any gift, especially if it brought clutter into the house. But back then, a person would have been happy with just about any gift they got. Number 12, a lot of minimalists today are neat and organized with their finances. I actually enjoy doing my home accounting. I treat it like a business. Even if there's very little money to manage, I enjoy doing it. I have a pretty ledger that everything is planned and recorded in. But back then, the most I saw was them writing down their deposits and their checks in that little ledger that came with their checkbook. And I remember a long time ago, back in the old days when I was younger, I used to use those little ledgers that came with the checkbooks. And I'll be honest, back then they were boring. Even back then they were. I don't use those now. I use, like I said, those pretty ledgers. Number 13. A lot of minimalists today don't want excess furniture, such as a china cabinet or a hutch. But back then, some people did have those things, and they actually looked nice and neat. Number 14. Most minimalists today have no knickknacks. No statues, no figurines, no decorations. But back then, people did have a few knickknacks and decorations. There was a lady who had a fake pie as a decoration in the middle of her table. It looked so real. I don't know what it was made out of, but her husband tried to cut into it. He said to her, "What is wrong with this pie? It won't cut properly. Is there something wrong with it? Is it old?" I don't want a fake pie in the middle of my table. I want a real pie. Those are the ways in which minimalists today are the same and different than people in the 70's. I had one similarity and 14 differences. Well, that's the way it was where I lived anyway. Have a great day.